All right, we're back with episode 11 of the Paleo Cyborg podcast, which might be episode 1 of the Longevity and Technology podcast with Dr. Jack Kruse from the Kruse Longevity Center. And you're joining me now from El Salvador?
Yes, I am.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
I just want to start out with some quick questions about the longevity space, and specifically the two biggest names right now, which are Peter Attia and Dave Asprey and Brian Johnson.
I think that's scary. If those are the biggest names, we are fucked.
Yeah.
The truth.
What's wrong with them using...
I wouldn't have guessed that. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah.
I think if you say maybe influencers right now, I think I'd buy that. But
okay.
I really would be stunned.
Yeah, I think they're more influencers, and people like David Sinclair maybe are bigger. But I was wondering your thoughts on rapamycin, metformin, and their use of peptides.
Yeah, well, the use of peptides is dangerous. You should stay as far away from it as you can because we don't know enough. It's very similar to the story that I told my own members about the messenger RNA vaccine a year before it came out, that the technology is so new. There was problems with the technology. If you read the patents, that you could surmise that there would be an issue that would come up with charge density and, the LNPs, the nanoparticles, the lipid nanoparticles. And the issue that I felt that they would wind up using SV40 to get past the nuclear membrane. And lo and behold, I was right. I would tell you the same thing with the peptide story. The peptide story really started before the latest craze with Ozempic and all that bullshit. It started really with some of the influence that are out there that you haven't mentioned. I wouldn't call them in the longevity space. I think they were the ultra marathoners, the biohackers, people like that, where they started pushing peptides. And what most people don't know about mitochondrial medicine is that mitochondria actually make about 1,200 peptides that actually alter physiological redox functioning. And when you don't understand how the peptides work totally, and you start to use them, you have a problem. So let's use the one peptide now that kind of everybody knows about, which is Ozempic. If you listen to the Ozempic commercials, they'll always tell you if you have MEN 1 or 2, you shouldn't use Ozempic. If you're a type 1 diabetic, you should not use Ozempic. But if you're a type 2 diabetic, you should use it. And immediately, what that should cause you to realize is, why is it that certain people can't use certain peptides? Okay, that's the question that should come up, but that's not the question that most people ask themselves. Because it turns out, for people that have different Fitzpatrick scores, different SNPs, different SAPs, different haplotypes, guess what? Certain peptides can be deadly. And it turns out that Ozempic can be a real problem. And this is the reason why it's associated with like MEN syndromes. Most people don't know is how Ozempic works as a GLP-1 drug or peptide, is that it affects exogenous thyroid tissue that's elsewhere in the body. Most people have the belief, that doctors get in medical school, that your thyroid is only in your thyroid gland in your neck. And it turns out, especially humans, further you go on the evolutionary tree, we tend to have extranodal thyroid gland in other places. And it turns out that's where the Ozempic peptide can cause some funny, how shall we say, signaling, physiologic signaling to lead to, medical comorbidities. And one of those things actually can be a cancer syndrome. That's what MEN syndrome is. When you hear the story between type 1 and type 2 diabetics, I think most people who are not science-based know that there's a difference between type 1 and type 2, but the difference that they believe comes down to the production or non-production of insulin. Well, it turns out that's not the only issue. The other issue is that type 1 diabetics are created radically different than type 2 diabetics. And type 1 diabetics have different phenotypes than type 2s. So it should raise the question, why is Ozempic a problem for type 1 diabetics? And it has a lot to do with the thermodynamics of the story. So my basic thesis has always been, you use the precaution principle when you're at the edge of a science that you really don't know the answer. And when it comes to peptides, we don't know the answer. So for example, things that I haven't talked about publicly prior to probably my latest Patreon blog post, and this will be the first podcast I talk about it, is one of the peptides that your mitochondria makes. It's called melanogenin. It's been it's been renamed here recently in the literature in the last probably 10 or 15 years. Why? Because they don't want you to know that this peptide actually tans the interior portions of your body. And when I did the Huberman podcast, I mentioned most people know about melanin on the skin. They don't realize that you have huge melanin stores inside your body. Well, it turns out your mitochondrial redox is actually what turns on this ability inside your body. And it does it through this peptide called melanogenin. Now, you probably have heard there's a lot of bodybuilders out there that use melanotan supplements, and those supplements are also peptides that actually interact with this system. And this is why many of those people who tan their bodies, dehydrate themselves to make their muscles look better for competition, wind up having heart attacks in the post, performance aspect of their training. Because what effectively are they doing? They're screwing with the charge between their skin, their muscles, and their central nervous system, as well as that as their heart. And it causes very much the same symptoms or set of situations that we're seeing with the COVID vaccines, where charge density is not equivalent in different parts of the body. And what guys like Atia, Asprey, and I guess that vegan guy that you talked about don't know is that charge is one of the things in nature, quantum mechanically, that is conserved by nature. So fundamentally, when you take peptides, what effectively are you doing? You are actually changing the charge density of different tissues in your body, and you don't know what tissues are being changed. Therefore, this is kind of like driving the Autobahn with no lights, wearing blue blocking glasses at 1 o'clock in the morning. Makes no fucking sense at all.
Yeah, because you don't know which way it's going, and so it's dehydrating you. Or
well, no, the bodybuilders dehydrate themselves before they do their shows. Now, I'm talking specifically about them because they use melanotan. I'm just giving you different examples of the craziness that people are out there doing. And why it's a bad idea. Fundamentally, you have to be able to string these things together. And the problem that I have with guys like Peter Attia, my issue with Attia and Asprey are completely separate. I think Attia is a smart guy, but I think Attia has stopped his education at the biochemistry level. He doesn't know anything about biophysics. He doesn't know anything about the physics of organisms. And unfortunately, that's where we operate on. That's where mitochondrial medicine is at. He recently just said, I don't know if you know this or not, but he recently just said that he's not even convinced that what's published in the literature tells us that circadian biology really is tied to longevity. In other words, what happens in clocks probably doesn't matter. Now, for you to have a New York Times bestseller book and say something like that publicly on podcasts, dude, that is almost, it's worse than hypocrisy. I think it actually borders on medical malpractice. But of course, nobody's going to hold his feet to the fire on that. And I could care less if they do, because I'm an open capitalist. He's been very successful in getting very wealthy people to pay him, $250,000 a year, be their doctor. If those people find value in that kind of advice, who am I to say no? I'm just going to tell you, those people I don't want being my patients.
Yeah. And what does Dave Asprey say about the same thing?
Well, Asprey is, I would say, he's a marketer. And I always tell people that marketing is legalized lying. Dave happens to be an expert marketer. So I'll let you draw the conclusions there.
Okay.
And the bottom line is he has sold, his bulletproof line for a lot of different money. Now he's involved in other things. I think ultimately Dave is also not smart enough to realize how to do this on his own. He took the idea from Big Pharma, and I actually think he was heavily influenced by David Sinclair. When Sinclair sold his resveratrol idea to GlaxoSmithKline and made $400 million off it, with him and Lenny Guarente. I think Dave decided just to pull a blueprint from their book and do the same thing in the paleo community, and he totally fleeced the paleo community. I was in that community, 15 years ago, and I told people back then, I said, look, if you think, the road is for longevity and health is going to be via, protein powders and fucking supplements, you're out of your mind. And of course, that didn't resonate with that group of people. But just because it didn't resonate with them doesn't mean I'm not going to tell you the truth. And Dave played in to that audience, and that audience made Dave unbelievably wealthy. So it makes no sense why Dave wouldn't do what he's doing now. And again, as I said to you about Atia, I am all about unabashed capitalism, but I look at Dave and Peter as crony capitalists. And that's probably where I have a problem with it. Dave doesn't have a medical license, so I don't think, medical boards and the medical malpractice attorneys will go after him. I think Dave, it's more of an issue. Can you trust the marketer? That's something that the audience has to decide. It's not me. But remember what my job is in my MD. My MD says do no harm. I took an oath. I believe it. I'm sure Peter Atia believes what he believes as well. But when it comes to me and Atia, I'm going to go mano a mano with him and basically point out all the flaws in his thinking, because that's what we do in medicine. We do it in something called M&M conference. And Peter, used to be a surgeon, before he became the longevity expert. So he's very familiar with this concept of M&M conference, where we go in a room and we tear each other apart. The difference between probably him and I is that he'd prefer to do this privately. I prefer to do it on podcasts. I prefer to call bullshit out. Why? Because I think the target of the bullshit is the audience. And the audience has a duty to be informed on both sides of the issue, both positive and negative. Then the audience decides who is more authentic in their interpretation of the science, and then they make, their decision appropriately. I feel once someone has informed consent, then it's fair game. If you still think taking a statin and taking the jab, as Adia tells his people, was a smart move, hey, knock yourself out. But my issue is when you're not told the other side and you don't have informed consent and there's not somebody there, to me, that's where medical freedoms don't exist for the audience. And that's where guys like Asprey and Atia, make their lunch. That's how they're taking advantage of people. And I think that needs to stop.
Yeah. I haven't heard you talk too much about decentralized medicine and Bitcoin. And I wanted to ask you a few questions about that, how you're presenting both sides to the audience and how we can improve medicine by decentralizing it.
Well, I mean, the whole point of decentralizing medicine is, remember, nature is a decentralized network. It's the natural one. Bitcoin is the artificial one that Satoshi created. They both operate on the same principle, which is timing, which makes another reason why Atiya's ideas are crazy, in my view. Bitcoin is a time ledger or a time machine that actually puts value in it. And nature does the same through circadian biology. So the other side effect of decentralized networks that we know from biology is that they're most thermodynamically efficient, situation. So like, for example, today, before I came on with you, somebody had asked me a question very similar to what you started with Peter Attia about, the big muscle problem in biology in Kleber's law. And I basically posted a 10 or 12 tweet thread train about Kleber's law and what it actually says, and why the obesity paradox is there, and why elephants are fatter than mice, and why elephants live longer than mice, even though they're fatter. And people need to be reminded that elephants and mice are mammals. That means that this idea that I'm presenting, while it may sound counterintuitive to smooth brain centralized thinkers, for those who are decentralized, there's actually a big lesson there. The lesson is that you come built in with a lot of epigenetic, how shall we say, workarounds for bad environmental situations. In Bitcoin, we call that, we can say the difficulty adjustment. And in a lot of ways, like Hashimoto's, obesity, I even think autism can be thought of the same way, that they are workarounds for bad environments, that when the environment changes, then we can readapt to that environment. And the point that I always like to make with humans is just think about a human baby that's born, completely immature, is over fat, but yet uses that fat to mature its brain outside the womb and goes on, assuming that the environment's good, lives a relatively normal life. But yet, when a human adult gets fat later in their life, we don't look at that situation the same way. We say, oh, this person's eating too many calories and that's why they're fat, or they're not doing enough exercise, that's why they're fat, when that thermodynamic argument makes no sense at all. We kind of know that in thermodynamics, anytime something loses energy, it gets bigger. That's true in swollen ankles that you get from, trauma. It's true in heart failure when hearts get bigger, and it's true when stars fail. They become red giants. So the physical principles are there. The key, behind Kleber's law and behind the physics thermodynamics for mammals is that when they get bigger, the environment is sucking energy out from them. Doesn't mean they're going to have less longevity. And the proof of that concept is the elephant lives way longer than the fucking mouse. The irony, though, when you look at their lifespans, they have the same number of heartbeats that are present in their lifespans. That should actually catch you. It's kind of like the paradox that I gave you about Ozempic. Why is it that, you have to avoid this if you have MEN1 or diabetes? That should stop people when they listen to this and go, yeah, why is that paradox kind of there? And when I think you find these enigmas, mysteries, or paradox, what you find out when you go down these rabbit holes is that the surface story that the guys like Johnson, Attia, and Asprey want you to believe is somehow true. And it's not. It turns out that the truth has a lot more facets to it than you want to know. And it's the marketers that take advantage of you not going down those rabbit holes. And I have to be honest with you, this is the flip side of decentralization that I don't think I've done a good job talking about. Decentralized medicine means a lot to people when they hear it. In other words, they think having decentralized doctor is good. But here's the flip side that I just kind of opened with Pandora's box. Okay. If you don't follow what the decentralized doctor tells you to do, that means there comes penalties for you too. And if a decentralized doctor gives you good advice and you don't take it, and say you do worse, then the next time you come for healthcare, let's say, I don't know, for type 1 diabetes, you're going to pay more for that care. Why? Because you've had a chance already to get it. And you will be able to, in decentralized network, at least that I'm building, you'll be able to check out, allopathic medicine or centralized medicine like Peter Attia gives you. And you'll also be able to do shamanism, which is kind of what, Dave Asprey's all about. You can even go through homeopathy or chiropractic care, whatever it is that you want to do. But the bottom line in decentralized medicine is that it's based on a meritocracy. And that meritocracy comes from the ideas that are buried in it, and those get tested. The problem is if the patient doesn't participate on the choice that they've tested appropriately, the patient gets a penalty for that too. See, that happens in nature. That's why we have extinction events. That's why baby seals get eaten by great white sharks. And right now, that's something that's not present in a centralized system. And that may be part of decentralized medicine that patients will not like. But as you probably have figured out, Steve,
Yeah.
I don't really care if people like it or not. The bottom line is nature doesn't care what the baby seal's opinion is either when it jumps in the water to go get fed. It is what it is. And as Feynman said, you have to accept nature as a queer bitch. Why? Because she is going to act ruthlessly at different places. And I think people need to take accountability for what I'm saying here. Like, for example, if you come to see me and say you're a former Ozempic patient that now has, just for argument's sake, say a neuroendocrine tumor in your pancreas after using Ozempic, I'm not going to hammer you for having the neuroendocrine tumor. I'm going to educate you why it happened. I'm going to explain to you, and you'll have no issues with me. But if I find out that you're doing Ozempic 6 months later at your follow-up appointment, you're going to have a problem. And that's one of the nuances to the system that I really haven't talked about much on podcasts, but I think it's important for us to talk about. And much like, Bitcoin wants to go mano a mano with Ethereum, XRP, fiat currencies, and it's based on a meritocracy. Bitcoin has been the best performing, currency in the world since it's born. And Bitcoin maxis love to point that fact out. And that's what a meritocracy is based. That's why it's really hard to argue with a maxi, because decentralized networks tend to win over time. And that's functionally why I believe evolution and Mother Nature chose a decentralized network to operate, biology upon. I don't think it's any shock when you actually think about it from that perspective.
Yeah. I think the key to decentralized is that you have to choose a good Sherpa to guide you.
Correct. That's a really good way of putting it. And I think that's what you started this podcast with. Be careful who packs your parachute. And like I said, I don't think, knowing both of those guys, I don't think there's malintent. I really don't. I just think it comes from a lack of awareness. I think it's more of a Dunning-Kruger effect. Do I think there's probably more onerous problem dealing with Dave? Because I do think Dave knows what he's doing. I honestly don't think Peter does. The vegan guy, I think he's just a rich guy that is throwing money at a problem, which is kind of what a lot of liberals do. We can look at our education system as key point, or really any of our politicians the same way. They think if they throw money at something, it'll eventually solve itself. And it turns out that there has to be some ordering in it. Like we saw in El Salvador. El Salvador really truly isn't decentralized totally yet, for one reason. I mean, he had to put all the bad hombres away to eliminate the thermodynamic leak, for the population. Yeah. Now that he's done that, now we can build second level, third level, and fourth level. And that's kind of like what we're doing with, RSK nodes, Liquid, Lightning, things like that in Bitcoin. I think Bitcoiners understand, the evolution in Bitcoin, like what the taproot changes mean for security and things like that. We're not saying that Bitcoin was originally built by Satoshi is going to stay the same. It just means that when we want to change things over time, it has to be done, with consensus. And the same thing is true in nature. Like when nature changes, a chimpanzee to a human, there has to be, changes thought out. And if those things don't work, that baby gets eliminated. If the baby is born with, a defect, sometimes the decision is made by the organism to abort that fetus. Some people may find that, I don't know, unpalatable, but nature does this as, part of the meritocracy. And I think that's the way I look at it. It's not how I looked at it 20 years ago. But it's also the reason I came upon Bitcoin early and understood it, because the mindset of nature and the mindset of the way the algorithm that Bitcoin operates has a lot in common.
Yeah, I think going back to the point where you said changes have to be made with consensus, it seems like if you try and maximize one variable at the expense of all the other ones, nature will take its revenge, and it will.
Well, Steve, isn't that functionally what Ozempic is? Isn't that exactly what Ozempic is?
Yes.
And isn't that what glutathione that Dave used to sell is? Isn't that what bulletproof coffee was? Like, you change one variable and you convince people that this is a really good idea, and you lather on some slick marketing bullshit. You use some centralized science, and then guess what? You go to, I don't know, some kind of paleo FX event and sell this to the public, who eats it up like lapdogs. Why? Because most of them they're looking for some help. I understand that people are looking for some help, but you have to realize that we're a complex animal, and we don't respond to one variable changes like an amplifier does. Like when my friend over here, Dave, plays some music for me today, and he screws with the knobs, I'm like, dude, that's not good enough. I need to hear louder music. He's over here pissed off at me that I'm bringing him in this podcast. But we're not like an amplifier for music. We're not like an equalizer for music. Once you add one variable in there, it causes a lot of different changes. And some of those changes that we talked about earlier are like, what happens to those 1,250 peptides that are made at the mitochondria? We don't know the answer to that. And that's the reason why, for a guy like the vegan Johnson, all the shit that he's doing, I think you need to really run the precautionary principle very carefully, because it may turn out some of the things that you do hurt you. Like I can tell you one of my own biohacks that hurt me. I did before I did Asprey's event in 2014. I used some CRISPR technology on myself to try to induce sleep apnea, and it caused some long-term problems. Some of those problems I'm still dealing with now. Now I got rid of the sleep apnea, but I didn't get rid of some of the other problems. And why, some people may listen to this and go, why the fuck did you do that, Jack? Well, if I didn't do it, Steve, I couldn't sit down here with you in 2023 and tell you why I'm so concerned about using peptides and why I'm so concerned about messenger RNA vaccines. It turns out the lesson that I learned through the CRISPR mistake was that when you change certain variables, you don't realize you may be changing 9, 10, 12 other thermodynamic variables in yourself that you may never be able to reharness. And that's the problem.
Okay. So what would you have done for your sleep apnea if you didn't use the CRISPR?
I would have done old-fashioned stuff. I just would have used my leptin prescription to do it.
Okay.
See, I was trying to be too slick. I was trying to figure out, could I use something faster to change the situation? In other words, I was making the same mistake that Johnson, Atia, and Dave are using. Is there a faster way than what nature provides? And guess what Uncle Jack found out? There's not. No, that was a lesson I found out over 10 years ago. And, you know, when I warn people about what I found, look, wounds create our wisdom. And Steve, you have to realize not everybody learns from their mistakes. That's really what this podcast is kind of about. This is what you asked me about, these three guys. I'm hoping the people that listen in their audience to things that they sell, they do, they parse the words and the ideas really carefully. That's, if you want to know the truth, in a decentralized network, using the precaution principle is important. Like I can tell you right now, if you buy Bitcoin, you know, in El Salvador, you know, in Edmonton, in Poland, in the UK today, the effect is going to be the same here as anywhere else. Now, some people who are maxis would argue, well, that's not true in Argentina because overnight, you know, local exchanges, Bitcoin went up way higher there than elsewhere. And I give them that. That argument holds for me. But ultimately, when you look at the entropy of the whole system, that balances out through the whole network. And I feel the same thing is true when we're talking about the biologic decentralized network and us. Like you may change the entropy of, say, your skin, your pancreas, or your eyes through a different hack that you were doing either with CRISPR or, you know, say an injectable or even a peptide. But the system is designed to balance entropy out. And the way it balances entropy out is the charge density is something that's always conserved in the system. But when you introduce a biohack, kind of like CRISPR, that can change charge density somewhere, and it ultimately affects entropy, it affects timing in the situation, bro, that's a totally different can of worms. And it's not the path that I want you to go down, your audience to go down, or the people, you know, who are listening to these guys. I think it's fair game to point some of this stuff out, because what am I really asking people to do? I'm asking people to think before they act.
Okay. Writing it down. Yeah, I'm just a little surprised that Atiya would say something like the circadian rhythm does not seem to be that important, because there's ebb and flow to everything, and I just don't understand what he means by that.
Well, I mean, I would tell you, have him on your podcast and ask him. Now, I can tell you that it's been stunning to hear some of his recent remarks. But, you know, I'm not here to tell you what's going on in his brain. I can tell you that the one thing that I do have a visceral feeling about is that I think the story about light water magnetism and circadian biology is cutting into his business. And I don't think he likes that much. So he's going to try to feed his own cognitive bias to try to throw some water on the circadian biology story. The problem is the circadian biology story is so well developed in the literature that he actually, you know, lauds as plausible. I mean, I will tell you, I think the literature is fraught with nothing but bullshit. But the amount of centralized information in and around circadian clocks and periodicity and their accuracy and how things are changed in disease, I mean, it's overwhelming right now. And for him to want to fight that battle, the reason I look at it as a positive, it tells me that his position is on shaky ground. It's kind of like him being on one of the volcanoes here in El Salvador after a rainstorm. And he's got his rubber-soled shoes that he wears to his F1 races.
Okay.
Not gonna go well.
All right. Yeah. Because how long is the upper bound for longevity with because Chris like been changing his number from 120 to 150.
Yeah, well, I
I
mean,
was wondering what your number is.
Dave steals the number from Aubrey de Grey. I mean, just remember, pretty much, it's not an original thought in Dave's head. He's a marketer. He steals everything from everybody. And I would say he's using that from Kurzweil, probably from Aubrey de Grey. But
Okay.
if you look at humans, I would tell you the answer is 1 second to 122.4 years. Why? That's how old Jean Calment was. Right now, she's the oldest living human that's well documented that we know about. I'm sure there's probably somebody else out there that says they're older, but they don't have the documented proof that she does. So right now, she's the upper boundary that we can say that's possible for modern Homo sapiens, which are the latest version of the silly talking monkey, that we can live. Now, for you to make a claim that we can go over 122.4 months, 122 years and 4 months, is going to take extraordinary evidence. None of that evidence exists in the science that Dave or Peter talk about. Not even Peter's, mentor, David Sabatini, about the mTOR switch. I would just tell you that nature is telling us the median, the mean, the average for humans is right around 70 to 80 years based on how we live our life now. And my opinion is based on how we live our life now, you're going to see human longevity go down. And this is, diabolically opposed to what Dave and Peter are telling you. So I want your audience listeners to know this. How about we fact check Uncle Jack and Peter and Asprey now? Why is it that in large American cities that lifespan is going down if those guys are right? Because technically, more people right now are doing more things for their health. I mean, Dave Asprey's bank account is proof positive of that. So is Peter's. I mean, Peter's getting $250,000 a year from people to pay for longevity. Dave's become a multi-millionaire by selling his shit out there, right? So if the return on equity should be, since these guys are rich, that the people who live in places like San Diego and Vancouver Island, where both of these guys are from, and Peter's got a place in New York, why is it that San Diego and New York and Vancouver Island has decreased longevity? Tell me. Explain it to me. And why was Jack Kruse the one that told you that was coming 10 years ago? And why is Jack Kruse telling you right now it's going to get worse? And it's going to get worse in those cities. See, to me, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, it has to do with Tesla's inventions and the microwave radiation and things like that.
Right. And those are all the things that affect the way the human animal is designed to work in, the decentralized network. Remember, the more we're disconnected from that decentralized network, the bigger problem we got. That's really what the crux of my argument's always been. And I feel like I'm pretty firm footing on that. I don't think what I'm telling you right now is hyperbole. And the data backs me up, doesn't back them up. In fact, I'll even throw the gauntlet down even further. I'll tell you that the United States specifically, you take us against the rest of the world, us versus the field, the United States spends more money on healthcare than any other country, yet we have the lowest return on equity, right? Where I think we're 37th healthiest in the world. Think about that. We spend the most, but we're the 37th healthiest. So isn't that a lot like the liberal conundrum that we talked about earlier about throwing money at a problem? Isn't that what the vegan Johnson's doing? Isn't that the people that are paying Peter and Asprey are doing? Hey, if I throw money at this stuff, shouldn't it get better? And it turns out the experience in the United States is, no, you're probably going to get worse. So you got to ask yourself, when you listen to a podcast like this, have I really thought about what Jack is saying from this perspective, from this viewpoint? And I don't think people have. And I tell people, when you listen to me, I'm not here to tell you that I'm going to get you to live any longer. There's one thing I am going to tell you, though. I'm going to make sure that you disconnect from the sausage maker that's centralized medicine. You know, there's nobody listening to this podcast that has a deficit of pharmaceutical or supplement needs. Okay, our species, Homo sapiens, are here as proof positive that they were able to evolve and do quite well for 2 to 4 million years without the need of big pharma or centralized medicine, and live almost exactly the same way and have the same amount of longevity. So longevity in us has never been the issue. Survival, from infectious diseases and trauma, yeah, that's definitely been affected here and there. But make no mistake, 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 500,000 years ago, humans still live 70 to 80 years old.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to defend Johnson and Asprey as best as I can. Johnson has a team of so-called experts, so he's just outsourced all of his decision making to his team.
Well, he has to do that. He can't think well. Makes sense for him to do that. But I would tell you, I outsource all my thinking to nature. Okay, that's what I do. I outsource it to all the frequencies in sunlight. That's what I do. That's the difference. So fundamentally, what you got to ask yourself is, who do you trust more, Johnson's cadre of experts or mine?
Okay, yeah. I'm very familiar with your act like the Sphinx, get the sunrise and the sunset light, use blue blocker orange glasses at night using a computer and things like that.
Turn the lights off. Turn the lights off at night.
Yeah.
Sunsets, your shit sets. You're done. I can tell you that's not what happens with Asprey. I can tell you that's certainly not what happens with Atia. And I know you're a vegan boy, from looking at him on Instagram. Yeah, he breaks that rule left and right. So I would just tell you, how good are your experts when the information they're putting in the system sucks?
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
So just as a specific question, Dave Asprey is taking testosterone because he's over 40. Do you think that's effective or?
Oh, I think for certain people, like for Dave, since he's an abuser of non-native EMF, I can see why he would do that. Do I think that's a wise choice? No, because it's going to change the charge density of certain tissues in his body. And even though his wife is a doctor, I don't think she's wise enough to know exactly, what those effects would be. Maybe Dave has hired other people who he has confidence in to tell him that. But that would be a question that probably you'd have to ask Dave, and you'd probably have to ask his doctors. But do I understand why he would choose to do that? Based on the very public choices that he's made in and around light? Absolutely.
Yeah, he says he's doing it to feel better and feel stronger.
Yeah, because the things that he's doing in his life are making him weaker. But that's the part he doesn't want to focus in on. See, that's the part that Jack Kruse focuses in on.
Right.
Jack Kruse is 20 years older than Dave Asprey, and Jack Kruse doesn't use testosterone. Well, I guess you could say I do, because I go on the roof here in El Salvador. So
yeah,
maybe that's not totally accurate. I'm just using it in a different way.
Right.
In light form.
Oh. Yeah, I think Dave is divorced now, but that doesn't matter. Are you still recommending the infrared?
What's that?
The infrared saunas?
I never recommend saunas. Saunas are way underpowered, but red light can definitely help. But the best red light is the 43% of red light in the sun. Yes. Nothing trumps that. And the time to maximize that is usually early in the morning and then later in the day, before the sun sets. So I call it the golden hour, the first hour of the day and the last hour of the day. That's where you're getting unabashed red light.
Right. Yeah, I bought a Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon t-shirt because of that, because of your recommend. You were talking about them earlier.
Well, it's funny because the guy that was laughing at me earlier, guess what he wore yesterday? A Pink Floyd shirt. and the guy that picked him up at the airport, guess what he was wearing? A Pink Floyd shirt. Neither one of them knew it. So you just confirmed some quantum entanglement here.
Yeah, the full spectrum.
There you go. It even happens over the internet. It's just like Luc Montagnier said. See that?
Oh yeah, what's that? Luc Montagnier?
Yeah. He's the one that did the
Oh,
story about quantum entanglement via water networks over the internet. I mean, you just did it yourself by mentioning the Pink Floyd story. I mean, Dave's sitting here drinking coffee on my couch, and he looked at me as soon as you said it. And I was like, yeah, I got to tell you about it. Because guess what? That didn't come up in this podcast without a reason.
right.
I promise you.
How do you spell Montagnier?
Montagnier. First name Luke, Luc. The article was in Nature, 2009. Very, very famous article.
Okay, I will look that up. That's great. That's good. What's the Jungian term for? I forgot. I'm sorry.
Say it again. I didn't hear what you said.
The Jungian term for when things come together?
Oh, well, there's two ways. The non-science way is called synchronicities.
Yes, that's it.
That's what the Bukele administration likes to use, but I like to use quantum entanglement. Why? Because it's accurate.
Yeah, it's always good to have different words to express different. It's the same thing.
Correct.
So we can wrap up by the end of the hour. I just wanted to ask you: do you hold your own keys off of exchanges?
Yes.
Yes, because that's
Dude,
important.
self-custody is,
Yeah.
let me just tell you what self-custody is like. Self-custody is like seeing the sunrise every morning. If you're not doing that, what the fuck you own Bitcoin for? You're an idiot. I look at it like this. The last 2 million coins that are coming up, those are for the jackasses that are going to think that the Bitcoin spot ETF is the best way to do it. They deserve what they get.
Yeah, that's going to be watered down and diluted.
Absolutely.
It's no better than Fidelity.
You got it.
Yeah.
See, I can say that to a Bitcoiner because you get where I'm coming from, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people in your audience go, what did he mean by that?
Yeah. And there's a final question. What's the difference between melanopsin, melatonin, and melanin?
Okay. That's an easy one. You're probably letting me off the hook easy.
Okay.
So melanopsin is a non-visual photoreceptor that we inherited from our ancestors. Our ancestors were fishes and amphibians. Okay. It is a blue light detector. It operates most 435 to 465. It's the source of the blue light hazard. It's the reason why non-native EMF, blue light, is the single biggest problem for humans. It's found in our fat. It's found in our blood vessels. It's found almost in every neuron of our body. So it's a huge issue. Melanin is a biologic semiconductor that is made from a gene in mammals. The gene is called POMC. That stands for pro-opiomelanocortin. That gets cleaved to 6 different peptides. One of those peptides is called alpha MSH. Alpha MSH is what creates melanin. Melanin comes in 3 forms predominantly in humans: eumelanin, phenylanin, and neuromelanin. Neuromelanin being the darkest of all. It absorbs all frequencies of electromagnetic radiation that any star would emit. And pheomelanin and eumelanin just have different atoms that are doped on it. They still do different things, but they operate differently in different environments that are found on Earth. And what was the last one you asked me? Was it melatonin?
Yes, regular melatonin.
Melatonin is an aromatic chemical that's made from the aromatic amino acid tryptophan. Tryptophan absorbs 200 to 400 nanometer light. It excites pi electrons. It's created by your mitochondria. Your mitochondria is a time machine, just like Bitcoin is. Melatonin is the time crystal that mitochondria make to tell time.
Okay.
That's pretty easy, huh?
Yeah. So
And when you put blue light on,
yep.
it lowers your melatonin level and it fucks up your hash rate. It fucks up your difficulty adjustment. And guess what happens? The value of your life goes down and you feel that in less time. You become Steve Jobs. How is that for some quantum entanglement?
Yeah, and he tried to become a fruitarian to.
Right, just like Johnson is doing, you know. So
So I don't
there's a
understand.
lesson there for Bitcoiners.
Yes. And what's the lesson?
The lesson is if you eat like a vegan and you own Bitcoin, you're probably going to wind up like Steve Jobs, dead at 50 or 60 years old and never be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Same thing is true with people who abuse technology. Most, unfortunately, Bitcoin maxis are tech abusers, which is part of the reason my message needs to get out to them. You know, most maxis tend to be millennials that hate boomers. The problem is this is the one fucking boomer you better listen to because I understand Bitcoin and your biology better than you do. I'm trying to reserve time for you.
Okay.
And nothing is a bigger epic fail to own a shit ton of Bitcoin and be dead at 50 years old.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are confused by if you're railing against the food gurus and the supplement gurus, how do we balance that out with the light, water, and magnetism?
Well, I
Because
mean,
we have to eat food, and how
yeah,
does
but
that
you
work?
only eat 2 or 3 times a day. Do you live around light 24/7? It should be fucking blatantly obvious why I have to rail against them. One is a ubiquitous problem. Food is not a ubiquitous problem.
Okay.
It's pretty simple. I mean, people right now are using light 24/7. I mean, if you don't believe me, next time you go somewhere, Steve, and you get on a plane and you take a night flight, take a picture out the window and tell me what the city looks like down below. Does it look fucking dark?
No.
All right, there you go. Now, just remember, each one of those blue lights that are on down there raise your blood glucose and your insulin level without you eating any food. Still think it's about food? That therein lies the problem, my friend. And then when you get to the food issue, just remember all food goes back photosynthetically to the web. What does that link it back to? The sun. How much do your food gurus know about photosynthesis in the sun? Like fucking nothing, dude. They're idiots. But yet you're taking advice from idiots. Basically, what you just allowed me to bring your audience to is exactly what your vegan Johnson guy is doing. He's outsourcing his ability to think to his cadre of idiots. That's what the food guys do. That's what the people who follow the food guides do. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to give you information so that you don't do that. I'm trying to teach you actually how the whole system works. I'm like Andreas Antonopoulos before he got canceled by Bitcoin. I'm trying to explain to you really how it works so that you don't fuck it up and buy Ethereum or XRP or fucking Solana, or you get stuck on Mount Gox or the FTX exchange, or you get rug pulled by Mashinsky.
Andreas Antonopoulos?
Yeah.
Okay, I will. For some reason, I'm not familiar with him, so I will look that up.
And dude, you're not a real Bitcoin maxi.
Man, he must have been. Is he from 10 years ago? Because
oh, dude, he's the fucking godfather. He would lecture 3 people in an auditorium filled with 1,000 chairs, and do it passionately. His books on Bitcoin, and as far as I'm concerned, to this day, they're the Bibles. Read them.
He must have been canceled thoroughly for me.
Oh, he was.
Yeah.
He was, because he became a shitcoiner later. But just because he became a shitcoiner later doesn't diminish his input to maximalism, to foundationalism. I mean, he had a lot of good things to say and to teach people, and it's the very same thing I'm telling you about Peter Attia. There's a lot of things that Peter Attia says that I don't disagree with.
Right.
It's just the things that I disagree with, I'm pretty loud about. And I feel the same way about Peter that I do about Andreas Antonopoulos. Take the lessons away from the gurus that are good, but throw the shit away that they're fucking idiots on. And I would tell you to do the same thing with me.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm glad I asked you that one extra question to get the extra information. And I'm going to definitely look up Luc Montagnier.
Good.
Because your message is just too simple for most people, which is basically the old eat local, because the food that you're eating is getting the same sunlight that you are, so you need. So if you're at a higher latitude like Scandinavia, you can eat higher fat and higher protein because you're getting less light.
That's correct. That's what it's all about, my friend.
And if you can afford it, you should move closer to the equator or the Tropic of Cancer.
Well, you don't know this, Steve, but the lady that's sitting 3 feet away from me, she's from Poland, 60th latitude. She's white as fuck. Guess what? She's here in El Salvador right now listening to this whole podcast.
Right.
She actually spent time with me, too, in Poland, too, before. So she knows that when I was in Poland on July 4th, did I not get up at 3:30 in the morning to see the sunrise?
Yep.
There you go. And all I ate was sausages. That was it.
Yeah, you definitely can build up your solar callus and get a tan. It's great.
Look, I'm a white boy from the 59th latitude, and I'll just tell you, I got a good tan. So, and I don't have to get a ton of sun to keep the tan anymore. So, just know that quantum biology works for you, even if you don't believe in it. That's what makes it different than religion. You don't have to believe in it for it still to work.
Right. You just try it out, see if Uncle Jack is correct, and
right. Hippos and lions do it. Why can't you?
That's a good phrase. All right.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, Steve. It's nice talking with you.
Nice talking with you. Thank you.
Right. Take care.
Have a great day. Bye.
You too.